The fire was the only warm thing in the cabin. Outside, the storm pressed against every window, heavy and relentless, and the only road out had been swallowed by the flood hours ago. They had stopped pretending it wasn't happening, the two of them, the strange, unbearable pull of it. She stood close to the hearth, arms crossed tight over her chest, watching the flames instead of him. But she could feel him watching her. That steady, quiet attention he gave everything. Like the world made more sense if he just looked at it long enough. Her throat was tight. "Don't look at me like that," she whispered. She didn't hear him answer. She heard him move. One slow step, closer. The fire crackled, the wind pushed against the glass, and the space between them, which had been the only safe thing she had left, began to disappear. Weeks earlier, she hadn't even known his name. 3 weeks before that night, Mara Cole drove up the mountain with her camera bag in the passenger seat and the deliberate blankness of someone who had made a decision and wasn't going to question it. She had told no one where she was going. That was the point. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road that turned muddy in the rain and barely existed in the dry season. Her Aunt Ruth had bought it 30 years ago because she said silence had a texture up there that you couldn't find anywhere else. Mara hadn't understood that until now. She pulled up to find a truck already parked outside. Her foot pressed the brake. She sat for a moment, looking at it. An old dark blue pickup, reliable looking and unremarkable. Tools visible through the rear window. She scanned the property. The front door was open. She got out of the car slowly. A man appeared in the doorway before she reached the porch steps. Tall, broad-shouldered. He was carrying a toolbox and wearing a worn gray jacket. He stopped when he saw her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "You must be Mara," he said. She hadn't expected that. "How do you know my name?" "Ruth talked about you." He set the toolbox down on the porch railing without hurry. "I'm Elias. I looked after the property for her." Mara felt something shift behind her sternum. She hadn't known Ruth had someone like that. She hadn't known a lot of things, apparently. "I wasn't expecting anyone here," she said. "Neither was I." He glanced past her toward her car. Just her luggage. No one else. He didn't ask. "I can leave if you need me to." She looked at the cabin. The door was open, and she could already see that the front window frame needed work, that the gutter on the left side had come loose. He had clearly been in the middle of something. "How long were you planning to stay?" she asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. There's work to do before the rains hit." He paused. "The season's early this year." Mara looked at the sky, heavy gray at the edges. She had checked the forecast before driving up and hadn't loved what she'd seen, but she'd driven anyway because she needed to be somewhere that wasn't home. "I'll stay out of your way," she said finally. He nodded once. "Same." He picked up the toolbox and went back inside. She stood on the porch for a moment longer, listening to the quiet. Then she followed him in. The cabin was smaller than she remembered, or maybe it just felt that way now that there were 2 people in it. Elias worked at the window frame while she moved through the rooms, touching things. Her aunt's books still on the shelves, the chipped ceramic mug by the sink, a photograph on the wall that Mara had sent Ruth years ago, of fog over a valley at dawn. She hadn't expected the photograph to still be there. She looked at it for a long time. The mug of coffee she was making went cold before she remembered it. Elias finished the window frame and moved outside without saying anything. She could hear him on the porch, working on the gutter, steady, methodical. He didn't hum or make noise. He just worked. She found herself grateful for that. That evening, they fell into an arrangement without discussing it. He cooked something simple with what was in the pantry. She washed up. He took the small room at the back. She kept the one that had been Ruth's. They ate at the table without ceremony, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable exactly. But she was aware of it in a way she couldn't quite explain. She didn't ask him about himself. He didn't ask about her. After dinner, she set her mug in the sink and turned, and he was still at the table, reading something, lamplight catching the angle of his jaw. He hadn't noticed her looking, or he had, and didn't need to do anything about it. She looked away first. That night, she lay in Ruth's bed and stared at the ceiling and told herself this would be fine. She was here to be alone, and he was here to fix things, and in 2 weeks, one of them would leave. She just hadn't decided yet whether it would be her. What she hadn't counted on was how much a quiet man could occupy a space. The next morning, she was certain she could keep the careful distance she had already decided on. She came outside early to find him crouched near the base of the porch steps. examining a section of wood that had begun to rot. He didn't look up when she appeared. She sat on the top step with her coffee and watched him work for a moment before she realized she was doing it. She looked away quickly. "You were a firefighter," she said. It came out more abruptly than she intended. She had found an old community newsletter in Ruth's bookshelf the night before, his name in the acknowledgments beside the local volunteer station. He looked up then, not surprised, just present. A long time ago. What happened? Knee. He went back to the wood, pried at a board gently, testing its give. Good excuse to do something quieter. She waited. He didn't add anything. "Ruth never mentioned you," she said. She hadn't meant it as an accusation, but it came out with a small edge anyway. She wouldn't have. He sat back on his heels. Ruth didn't explain things about herself. She just did them. Mara felt something press against the inside of her chest. That was accurate. That was exactly Ruth. She looked down at her coffee. "How long did you know her?" 7 years. He was quiet a moment. "She caught me trying to fix her mailbox without asking. Invited me in for coffee. After that, it was just once a year up here, making sure the place was ready for winter." A pause. "I kept coming after she passed because it seemed wrong to stop." The morning birds went in the trees above them. Somewhere down the mountain, a stream was running faster than usual. "She would have liked you being here," Mara said. She hadn't meant to say it. But once it was out, she knew it was true, and the truth of it sat heavy and warm in her chest at the same time. He glanced at her, not a long look. Just a flicker of something, quiet and careful. Then he went back to the wood. She finished her coffee on the step and didn't go inside for a while. There was something about watching someone work that was easier than conversation. You could see what a person cared about by the way they used their hands. That afternoon, the rain started. Not the real storm, just the precursor, the kind that settles in and makes the whole mountain feel smaller. She was crouched near the table with her camera, adjusting her focal length, photographing the way the drops moved down the glass, when she became aware that Elias had stopped reading. She looked up. He was watching her, not staring, just watching. The way he watched the sky before he made a call about the weather, calm and attentive and not embarrassed about it. Her first reaction was to lower the camera. Her second was to realize she didn't want to. She kept shooting. He went back to his book. But her pulse had kicked up somewhere she couldn't quite locate, soft and persistent. That evening, she set 2 mugs on the counter without thinking. She was already filling the kettle before she caught herself. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. He took the mug she handed him, and their fingers didn't quite touch, and she was almost sure she felt the warmth of his anyway. A half-inch of air between them, and her breath came out a little shorter than it should have. She told herself she was tired. She was not tired at all, and that was the part she wasn't ready to think about. The next morning, she was still certain she had the situation managed. She almost believed it. The rain had continued overnight, soft and constant, and by the time she came to the kitchen, Elias had the coffee ready, and the window above the sink open a crack, letting in the smell of wet pine and earth. He was at the table with a notepad, writing something down in the careful way he did everything, and he slid a mug toward her without looking up. She took it. Their fingers didn't touch. She was almost sure she felt the warmth of his anyway. She leaned against the counter and drank and looked at the window and told herself this was fine. Comfortable silence was fine. It didn't mean anything. She was sorting through Ruth's bookshelf later that morning when she found the box. A shoebox tucked behind the paperbacks, tied with kitchen twine. She lifted it and felt immediately that it was personal, the weight of it, the deliberateness of where it had been placed. She opened it at the kitchen table. Letters, maybe 40 of them, all addressed to Ruth in handwriting she didn't recognize. She unfolded the first one and read the opening line and then folded it back carefully because it was love. Real love. The slow, certain kind. She sat for a long time with the closed box in front of her. Elias came in from the back of the cabin, wiping his hands on a cloth. He stopped when he saw her face. "You okay?" She looked up. Her eyes were dry, but her throat wasn't quite right. "Did you know Ruth was in love with someone?" He set down the cloth. He came and sat across from her without hurrying. "She mentioned someone once. Didn't give a name. There are letters." Mara touched the box. 40 years worth. He looked at the box but didn't reach for it. "Did she send them?" "I don't know. They're addressed to her." She paused. Maybe someone sent them and she kept them. Maybe she wrote them herself and never sent them. Neither option was comfortable. Both were so deeply Ruth. Elias set his elbows on the table. He wasn't looking at the box anymore. He was looking at her. She had a whole life you didn't see, he said. Not unkindly, just true. I know. Mara pressed her lips together. I thought I knew her. You did? He said it quietly, with certainty. Knowing someone doesn't mean seeing everything. Sometimes people leave parts of themselves private, not because they don't trust you, because those parts are just theirs. She looked at him. He looked back at her without apology, without performance, just steady. Something moved through her that she didn't name. She put the box back on the shelf. They had dinner after, the two of them at the table, and she found herself talking about Ruth without quite deciding to, about the summer she was 9 and Ruth had taught her to develop film in the bathroom with the curtains taped shut and a red bulb in the socket. Elias listened without trying to fill the spaces. She hadn't talked about Ruth to anyone since the funeral. The words had been backed up and waiting, and now they were moving, and it didn't hurt the way she had expected. After dinner, she was washing up and he was drying, and she handed him a bowl, and his fingers covered hers on the rim before she passed it fully. A half second, neither of them pulled away immediately. Then she let go. He dried the bowl, didn't comment. She stared at the soap on her hands longer than she needed to. That was when the storm arrived, not gradually. All at once, the way mountain storms came, the sky going dark in minutes, and the first crack of thunder rolling across the ridge like something had given way. The power cut out before she had dried her hands. The cabin went dark except for the light through the windows, blue-white and moving. I'll get the candles, he said. She stood in the kitchen in the dark and listened to the rain hit the roof with sudden, complete force. They set candles on the table, on the shelf, on the windowsill by the fireplace. He built the fire up without being asked, and the cabin came back to life in amber and shadow, smaller than it had been a minute ago. The walls closer, the space between them measured differently. The road, he said, checking his phone before the signal dropped, already flooding on the lower section. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said what that meant for tomorrow. She sat near the fireplace with a book she wasn't reading. He sat across the room with his back to the window, the candle on the table between them guttering in a draft she couldn't locate. The storm was loud and specific and everywhere, and the cabin held them inside it with the particular intimacy of a space that has no exits. She was not going to think about the road. She turned a page she hadn't read. Time passed. The fire settled. The storm didn't. At some point, she became aware that he had stopped reading too. She could feel it, the shift in the room's attention, the way silence changes texture when two people are both inside it on purpose. She didn't look up, but she could feel him watching her. That steady, quiet attention he gave everything, like the world made more sense if he just looked at it long enough. It had been there since the first day, that attention, and she had been filing it under things she would not think about. But in this cabin with the fire and the dark and no road and nowhere to be, there was nowhere left to file it. Her throat was tight. She turned another page. Mara? She went still. She didn't look up. Not yet. If she looked up, she would have to deal with whatever was on his face. And she already knew what was on his face, had known since the afternoon on the porch when he handed her a mug and their fingers didn't quite touch, and the air between them felt like something with weight. Don't, she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. I haven't said anything. I know. She finally looked up. She didn't want to. She did it anyway. He was across the room, watching her with that look, open and certain, and completely without agenda. The fire threw amber light across one side of his face and left the other in shadow, and he was so still. The way he was always still. The way that had been making her chest tight for 3 days without her permission. Don't look at me like that, she whispered. He held her gaze. He took one step closer. The fire crackled. The wind pushed hard against the glass, and the space between them, which had been the only safe thing she had left, began to disappear. She didn't move. She wasn't sure she could. The fire popped loudly, sending a spark up the chimney. Elias stopped exactly where he was, one step closer. Nothing more. The amber light caught the line of his jaw, his hands loose at his sides, open and without demand. I'm not going to pretend I don't see it, he said, voice low and steady, almost lost under the rain. The way you look at the fire instead of me, I see it, Mara. And I'm not asking you to do anything about it tonight." Her breath caught. The words were so simple, so without pressure, that they landed harder than anything louder could have. "You don't owe me an explanation. You don't owe me a single word you're not ready to say." He held her gaze one moment longer. "I just need you to know I'm not going anywhere." Then he went back to his chair, quietly, as if the last 30 seconds were something said and left between them, with no urgency and no expiration. She stood at the fireplace for a long time after. The space where he had stood was still warm. She was fairly certain it would stay that way. The following morning, she was almost certain the careful distance she had built was still intact. She had been wrong about things before. It happened during the repair of the kitchen shelf, the one above the stove that had been leaning for years without anyone fixing it. She was passing him screws from the small tray on the counter, keeping to the far side, and they had been working in comfortable quiet for 20 minutes when he reached across her to test the bracket. His arm passed close to her shoulder, not touching, just close. Her breath caught, audible. He paused. He was near enough that she could see the faint scar near his temple, the slight roughness of his jaw, the way he held still in that particular way he had, like patience was something he had learned rather than been given. He didn't step back. "Steady for a second?" he asked. She put her hand on the shelf beside his, her fingers 3 inches from his. She looked at the wall. "I've got it," she said. He worked the screw in. Neither of them moved. The kitchen smelled like rain and old wood and something warm she couldn't identify, something that was simply him, and her pulse was in her throat. He stepped back. She moved her hand. The shelf was level. He tested it with a firm press, then stepped away and picked up his tools without a word. She turned to the counter and found something to do with her hands. That afternoon, she went outside with her camera, even though the sky was threatening, because she needed the open air and the wide-angle lens as a buffer between herself and whatever was happening in the kitchen. She shot the clouds building over the ridge, the way the light flattened before a storm, turning the pines into something almost gray. She heard the porch creak. He was leaning against the railing with 2 mugs. She walked over and took one. Their fingers brushed on the handle. Neither of them commented. The warmth of the contact stayed on her skin longer than the coffee steam, and for a moment the only sound was the rain beginning, and something rapid and unreasonable in her own chest. "What are you shooting?" he asked. "The light before the storm." She tilted the camera screen toward him. He looked at it properly, not the way most people did, glancing and nodding. He actually looked. "The trees look like they know something's coming," he said. She looked at the image again. He was right. She hadn't consciously framed it that way, but it was exactly that. The trees braced, waiting. "Yes," she said, surprised by how seen that felt. He handed the mug back. "Storm's going to hit tonight." "How bad?" "Bad enough." He looked at the ridge. "I checked the roof and the drainage this morning. We'll be fine." She looked at the side of his face, the ease of his certainty, unhurried and grounded. Not the kind of confidence that needed an audience, the kind that came from knowing what he knew. Her pulse moved in a way she had been telling it not to. "Thank you," she said. She meant for the coffee. She also meant for the roof, and possibly for other things she couldn't name yet. He turned and looked at her. That look, steady and too clear, and seeing more than she wanted it to. She looked back at the camera. The warmth in her chest didn't move. That evening the storm hit and the power went out, and they lit candles, and she found a chessboard in Ruth's cupboard and said it without thinking. "Do you play?" He looked at the board. "Yes." "I'm warning you," she said. "I don't like losing." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. "Good." They played at the table with 2 candles between them, and the storm loud outside. He was methodical. She was intuitive. Neither style was wrong. She lost the first game in 40 minutes and immediately started setting up the pieces again. He watched her reset without commenting. "Again," she said. "Okay," he said. The second game went longer, an hour, the candles burning down. He took her knight with a move she hadn't seen coming, and she sat back and looked at the board and then looked at him. "You've been playing a long time," she said. "My father taught me." He paused. It was the only thing he did slowly. She looked at him across the board. He was watching the pieces, not her. and there was something in his expression she hadn't seen before, something briefly unguarded. She moved her bishop without looking at the board. "Checkmate," he said, a few moves later, very quietly. She stared at the board. "You didn't let me win." "You'd hate me if I did," he said. She looked up. He was watching her now, and the candlelight was doing something specific to the planes of his face, and his eyes held something she couldn't quite read, but couldn't look away from either. "You're right," she said. "I would." Something passed between them, brief and alive, and neither of them acknowledged it. She packed the pieces away and told herself she was tired. She wasn't. She just needed to be on the other side of a closed door for a moment before she made a decision she wasn't ready for. She lay in Ruth's bed and listened to the storm and pressed her palm flat against her sternum. The heart under it was doing something it wasn't supposed to be doing, and it wasn't going to stop just because she told it to. The morning after the storm, she told herself the feeling had peaked and would now begin to recede. She had always been good at being wrong about herself. The flood had swallowed the road overnight. She and Elias had stood at the edge of it together that morning, looking at the place where the dirt used to be, now all moving brown water. He said another week, maybe 10 days, in the same tone he used to say the shelf is level. Even, factual, she nodded. She looked at the water and not at him. They walked back to the cabin without speaking. That should have felt awkward. It didn't. Later that afternoon, she was going through Ruth's printed photographs, sorting them loosely by decade, when she found the one she hadn't expected. Herself, 7 years old, standing on the same porch with a gap-toothed smile and her hair in 2 uneven braids. The uncomplicated fullness of being somewhere you were entirely wanted. Her throat closed without warning. She didn't make a sound, but she felt her eyes go bright and sharp, and she pressed her fingers to her mouth and looked away from the photograph. Elias looked up from his book. He didn't speak. He didn't ask what was wrong. He set the book down, crossed the room, and sat on the floor beside the box of photographs without being invited. He picked up one from the top of the unsorted pile, an old one, Ruth Young, laughing at something outside the frame. "She had a good laugh," he said quietly. Just that. Mara's breath released in a slow, shaking exhale. Not crying. Something adjacent to it, the feeling that waits just behind the sternum and sometimes lets go without permission. "She did," Mara said. They sat like that for a while, going through the photographs side by side on the floor. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. At some point, his shoulder was near enough to hers that she could feel the warmth of him. Not touching, just close, and she didn't move away. She didn't move toward him either, but she stopped flinching from it. When they finally put the box away, he made dinner without her asking, something simple with what they had, and she sat at the table and felt hollowed out and somehow also less alone than she had been since Ruth died. She hadn't said that out loud. She was not going to. After dinner, she was washing up and he was drying, and she handed him a plate, and his fingers covered hers on the rim before she passed it fully. A half second, neither of them let go. Then she did. He dried the plate, didn't comment. She stared at the soap on her hands longer than she needed to. The warmth where his fingers had been was still there, specific and undeniable. Her pulse was in her wrists, in her throat, in places pulses should not be so loud. She told herself she was grieving. She told herself the proximity was manufacturing something. She told herself a dozen things in the right order, and still went to bed with the feeling of his hands over hers, warm and unintentional and absolutely deliberate at the same time. She was in serious trouble, and she was almost certain she had known it since the moment she handed him that first mug and felt the air between their fingers like something that had weight. The next morning, she stopped pretending the careful distance was possible. She just didn't say so out loud. He had been checking the tree line that morning, a precaution after the storm, making sure no damaged limbs were hanging over the roof. She had gone out to photograph the light on the wet bark, the individual drops trembling on the needles. She ended up 20 feet from him without quite knowing how she got there. He was reaching up to examine a branch, jacket lifting at the hem, face tilted up into the gray-gold light. She raised her camera without thinking. She had his photograph before she realized what she was doing. She looked at the screen. He was in 3/4 profile, completely unguarded. The light was doing something extraordinary to the side of his face, the kind of light she sometimes waited hours for. She looked at the image for longer than was reasonable. She did not delete it. That evening, he asked to see her photographs. She hesitated, Real hesitation, the old reflex that came from years of being careful about what she showed and to whom. But he had asked simply, without pressure, and she found herself opening the laptop. She showed him the storm images first, safe ones. The compressed sky, the flooded road, the pine trees in the flat light. He moved through them slowly, really looking. Not the polite glance most people gave, the kind of looking that meant something. Then she made a mistake. Or maybe not a mistake. She clicked past the one of him by accident and he stopped her. "Go back," he said. She went back. He looked at it for a long moment. She watched his face instead of the screen. He wasn't performing a reaction. He was just sitting with the image. "You make people look like they don't know they're being seen," he said. Her chest was so tight she almost didn't answer. "That's sort of the whole point." He turned and looked at her. Full attention, the kind she usually needed her camera between herself and the world to tolerate. She didn't have the camera. She held it. His gaze and the weight of it, and the particular way he looked at her without appearing to need anything from what he saw. Her fingers were not entirely steady on the keyboard. "I don't photograph people usually," she said, quieter than she intended. "I don't like making them uncomfortable." "You didn't make me uncomfortable," he said. Simple, direct, no cover for it. "No?" "No." He held her gaze another moment, steady and clear. "It's the opposite of that." She didn't ask what he meant. She was fairly certain she already knew, and knowing it made the air in the room feel different, thicker, like before a storm. She closed the laptop, but the photograph was already saved. She knew exactly where it was in her folders. She knew she would look at it again. That night, she sat by the window long after the candles burned low. The camera wasn't enough of a wall anymore. She had known it from the moment he said it's the opposite of that, from the way he had held her gaze and not retreated from it. She thought about Daniel, the way he had looked at her, which had never been like this. Daniel's attention had always wanted something back. Elias just looked and let her be. She thought about how safe that felt, and how frightening. She went to bed without looking at that thought directly, but it followed her into sleep, quiet and certain, the way water follows the lowest ground. The following afternoon, she was almost certain she understood what she was feeling. Understanding it didn't help at all. The road was still flooded. They had established, without saying it, that they were no longer pretending the 2 weeks would simply end and they would go back to being strangers. Something had shifted the evening she had shown him the photographs. The space between them was more honest now about what it was holding. She was photographing the cabin interior that afternoon, documenting it the way she had learned to document things she wanted to keep. Elias was near the fireplace, adding wood, crouched with his back to her. The fire threw amber light across the room, across the back of his jacket, the line of his shoulders. She raised the camera. He heard the shutter. He turned and looked at her over his shoulder. She lowered the camera slowly. "You could just ask," he said. But he wasn't annoyed. There was something in his voice, careful and a little rough, that was nowhere near annoyance. "Would you have said yes?" He stood up and faced her fully. He looked at her in that way he had, direct and unhurried, and something moved in his expression that she hadn't seen before. "Yes," he said. Her breath went somewhere she couldn't locate. She raised the camera again. He stood still. He let her photograph him the way he let her most things, without comment or performance, just present. She took 3 shots. Then she lowered the camera and looked at him across the cabin without any buffer between them. Elias felt his chest tighten. For the first time in years, someone was seeing him without asking for anything in return. "Why did you stay?" she asked. The question came from somewhere she hadn't been consciously monitoring. "When I first arrived, you could have left." He was quiet for a moment. "Because Ruth asked me to look after the place. That meant whoever was in it." "She's gone," Mara said softly. "I know." His voice was low. "I still wanted to." Her throat was very tight. She looked down at the camera in her hands. The screen showed his face, patient and clear and looking at something just off-center from the lens. Looking at her, Elias, Mara. Nothing followed. Just their names in the quiet of the cabin with the fire going behind him and the rain soft on the windows and the particular weight of 2 people standing at the edge of something neither of them had planned. He took 1 step toward her. She took 1 step back. Her shoulder met the wall. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of herself, of what she would do if he came any closer. of how badly she wanted him to. "Don't," she said. The word came out thin. He stopped. He didn't look hurt. He looked steady and very careful, like a man who would wait as long as she needed. That was almost worse. "Okay," he said quietly. He went back to the fire. She stayed against the wall for a moment longer. Then she took her camera and went to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands flat on her knees and breathed. She had been here before. She had felt this before. And she had been completely wrong about what it meant. But when she closed her eyes, she could still see him taking that one step toward her. And she could feel in her chest the undeniable specific ache of someone who had wanted him to keep coming. She closed her door and leaned against it. She had wanted him to keep coming. And she lay awake a long time in the dark. And the only thing between her and walking back out there was the fear that she was exactly as foolish as she had been the last time she had believed in something this much. The next morning, she was almost certain she had made the right decision to pull back. She told herself that through breakfast, through the morning, sitting at the table with her headphones in, not listening to anything, watching him outside through the window, and then making herself look away. Through the afternoon, when she could hear him in the back room and the pull of him was a physical thing in her chest, steady and specific and refusing to recede the way she had told it to. By evening, she was certain of nothing. She was at the fireplace when he came back inside. She heard him stop when he saw her. She didn't turn around. "Mara." "I know," she said, preemptive, protecting herself from whatever he was going to say, from how reasonable it would be and how much she would want to believe it. "You don't know what I was going to say?" She turned. He was across the room, still in his jacket, and he was looking at her the way he had been looking at her for days now, open and certain, and completely without agenda. That look, the one she had no defense against because it didn't want anything from her. It just saw her. "Don't make this harder than it already is," she whispered. He went still. "I'm not trying to make it hard," he said quietly. "I'm just here." "That's what makes it hard." The fire crackled behind her. The rain was still at the windows, soft and persistent, the same rain that had been there for days, keeping them inside, keeping them close, wearing down everything she had been using to keep distance between herself and what she was feeling. He didn't move toward her. He didn't retreat either. He just stood there in the amber light with his jacket on and his hands open at his sides. And she looked at him and felt the distance between them like a physical thing, like something with edges she could measure. "Elias, I'm not him," he said. Quietly, simply, the most important sentence in the room. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I know you can't do that yet. I'm just asking you not to run yet either." Her eyes went hot. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. She was not going to cry. She was not. She did. Just a few tears, quiet and fast, and she turned away to hide them. She felt him cross the room. He stopped behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, his breath near the back of her head, the specific gravity of him. Not touching, not asking, just there. "I don't know how to do this without getting it wrong again," she said to the fire. "I don't either," he said. "That's not the same as it being wrong." She pressed her hands against her eyes. The fire crackled. The rain moved against the windows. She turned around. He was right there, close. The firelight caught the line of his jaw, the faint scar near his temple she had memorized without meaning to. Her gaze dropped to his mouth for half a second before she forced it back up. His breathing was slow, deliberate, like he was measuring every inch of space between them and had decided not to close any of it without her. She felt her own pulse in her ears, loud enough to drown the rain. Neither of them moved. The silence stretched between them, heavy and alive, and she swallowed, and her hands trembled at her sides, and she looked at his face and saw none of the things she had seen in Daniel's face. No management, no calculation, no waiting for her to soften so he could get what he wanted. Just him, steady and real, and so patient it nearly undid her. "I'm scared," she said. "I know," he said. "Me too." She lifted her hand slowly, as if testing whether the air would let her through. Her fingertips found his jacket first, then the warmth of his chest beneath the fabric. His heart thudded hard under her palm, once, twice, matching the frantic rhythm in her own throat. He didn't move, just waited. She rose on her toes an inch at a time, his head dipped, fraction by fraction, giving her every moment to stop. Their breaths met first, warm and unsteady, the space between them collapsing slowly until it was almost nothing. Then their lips touched, barely. A question more than a kiss. She froze there, tasting salt from her own tears. He exhaled against her mouth, soft and ragged. Only then did she press closer, letting the kiss deepen just enough to feel real. It lasted seconds, maybe 10, long enough to break something open inside her chest. Then a flash of Daniel's face crossed her mind. The same warmth once, the same feeling of certainty, the same belief that this was the truest thing she had ever felt. Her body stiffened. Elias felt it. He eased back instantly, forehead resting against hers, not retreating fully, just creating space she hadn't asked for yet, but needed. "Okay," he said, very quietly. She exhaled. "I need some time," she said. "Not because of you, because of me." He nodded. He looked at her steadily, without hurt, without pressure. She almost wished he would push back. It would make him easier to resist. "Take what you need," he said. She slipped into her room and closed the door with a quiet click. In the dark, she pressed 2 fingers to her lips where his had been. The warmth lingered. Then the cold came, sharp and familiar, the doubt arriving the way it always did, right behind the feeling she most wanted to believe. She slid down the door until she sat on the floor, knees to her chest, breathing shallow. Trust felt like falling again. And she still remembered exactly how the ground felt when it arrived. 3 days before the road finally cleared, she was almost certain the past had stayed buried. She heard the car before she saw it. She was on the porch with her coffee when the sound reached her through the trees, an engine working up the lower section of the road that had been underwater for 2 weeks. She set the mug down slowly. The road had drained enough overnight. She had known someone could get through now. She just hadn't let herself think about who might try. She knew before the car appeared. Daniel's silver car came up the dirt track carefully, and he stepped out wearing the expression he always wore when he had decided something was his to manage, concerned, reasonable, entirely in control. He looked up at her on the porch, and his face opened into warmth, the way a door opens when someone wants you to think it was never locked. "Mara." His voice was exactly right. "I've been worried sick." Her chest went cold, not surprised. Just cold, the way a body recognizes something before the mind catches up. "How did you know I was here?" she asked. "Your neighbor mentioned the cabin." He said it the way he always said things that should have required an apology, lightly, as a small detail. "I just needed to see you were okay." She heard the front door open behind her. Elias stepped out. He didn't say a word. He stood 1 step behind her and to the left, one hand resting easy on the door frame, and he looked at Daniel with the flat, unhurried attention of a man who had already understood the entire situation and was waiting to see what it would require of him. The air on the porch changed. Daniel looked at Elias. Something moved across his face, quick and carefully controlled. "Who is this?" "Someone who lives here," Mara said. Daniel came up the porch steps. He moved toward her with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to closing distance without asking. And when he touched her arm, lightly, just his hand on her sleeve, her whole body registered it as wrong. The wrongness of a touch that had once had permission and no longer did. That had possibly never been as warm as it felt. She stepped sideways, not back. Sideways, deliberately, so his hand fell away cleanly. She heard Elias shift his weight behind her. Not forward, just present, like a wall that had decided to stand closer. "We should talk," Daniel said. "Alone." "There's nothing to talk about." "Mara." His voice dropped, private and slightly injured, the register he used when he wanted her to feel responsible for his feelings. "I drove all the way up here because I care about you. You drove up here because I didn't ask you to." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Her pulse was loud in her ears. "I came here alone on purpose." Daniel's jaw tightened, barely, just a flicker. Then he smiled. Patient, practiced. "I understand you're upset. I'm not going to apologize for caring." She felt Elias behind her, the specific warmth of him at her back, unhurried and absolutely solid, not intervening, not speaking. Just there, the way a mountain is just there, unmovable and entirely without urgency. Something in her spine straightened. Something in her voice found its floor. "You should go," she said. Daniel looked between her and Elias again, slowly this time, and he put the pieces together in the way he always did, quickly and narrowly, and she could see it land on his face, the awareness that he had miscalculated something. Did something happen up here? His voice had an edge now, thin and controlled. Nothing that is your business. I think it is. It isn't. She held his gaze and her hands were not shaking, even though her pulse was everywhere. In her throat, in her wrists, behind her eyes. We're done, Daniel. I said that 3 months ago, and I meant it then, and I mean it now. Please leave. He looked at her for a long moment. He was waiting for her to soften. She could feel the weight, the particular silence of a man who had learned that silence was a tool. She didn't soften. He looked at Elias one more time. Then he walked back down the steps, unhurried, preserving the performance of someone who had made a choice rather than been told one. He got in his car. The engine turned. He drove away down the road he had come up, and the mountain absorbed the sound of him in less than a minute, the pines closing over it like water. Mara stood on the porch and did not move until she was certain the sound was gone entirely. Then her legs went, not dramatically, just the quiet departure of all the adrenaline at once, and she sat down on the top step heavily and put her hands on her knees and breathed. Elias sat beside her. He didn't speak. He didn't put his arm around her. He just settled beside her on the step, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his shoulder near hers, and he let her breathe. The mountain was quiet. A bird called once in the trees below and went silent again. After a long time, she said, "He cheated on me. That's why I came here." "I know," he said, gentle. "You didn't have to tell me." "I know." She looked at the trees. "I wanted to." The admission sat between them quiet and complete. She felt it then, arriving the way cold air moves under a door. The fear, not of Daniel, of this, of the fact that she had just stood firm on that porch, calm and steady and certain, and the whole time Elias had been at her back, and she had felt it, the specific difference of his presence, the way it had changed what she was capable of. She had drawn from it. She was already drawing from him in a way she had promised herself she would never do again. She stood up. "Thank you," she said quietly. The words were not enough, and she knew it and said them anyway. She went inside before he could answer. She heard him exhale behind her on the step. Slow and careful, the exhale of a man holding himself still, the way you hold still around something you don't want to frighten. She went to her room. She sat on the floor with her back against the bed. Her hands went to her face. She had felt safe with him behind her. Genuinely, completely safe, in a way she hadn't felt in over a year. And the terror of that, the sheer specific terror of trusting someone that much after what trusting someone that much had cost her, pressed against her sternum, like something that needed to be let out and had nowhere to go. She was not going to cry. She pressed her palms harder against her eyes. She was more afraid of how right it had felt to have him at her back than of anything Daniel could ever do to her. And that was the thing she had no idea what to do with. 2 days later, she was no longer certain of anything except what she wanted. That terrified her less than she expected. She had spent a day and a half in honest conversation with herself, the kind she had been avoiding for months. She had come to the mountain to be alone, and instead, she had learned something she hadn't been looking for, that the walls she had built were not the same as knowing herself. She found Elias on the porch in the late morning, looking at the road. "It'll be clear by tomorrow," he said. She stood beside him, looked at the thinning water, the mountain going back to itself. "Then what?" she asked. He looked at her. "Then we have a choice," he said. "You go back to your life. I go back to mine. Or we figure out what this is when it's not in a cabin with nowhere to go." "That's terrifying," she said. "Yes?" He paused. "Most things worth having are." She looked at his hands on the porch railing. The knuckles, the old burn scar on his forearm that she had noticed weeks ago. The steadiness of a man who had learned how to be still when the world was moving fast. "Tell me something true," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I haven't wanted anything in a long time," he said. "I'd gotten used to that, and then you drove up in that car, and there was a very specific look on your face when you saw me, like you'd already decided I was going to be a problem." The corner of his mouth moved. "I thought, this woman is going to be exhausting, and I was right, and I stayed anyway." She laughed, genuinely, startled out of it. He looked at her like that was the best thing he had seen in weeks. Her chest opened like a window. "Tell me something true," he said. She thought about deflecting. Then she thought about the photograph she had taken of him on the first day, the one she had looked at more times than she could justify. "I photograph things I want to keep," she said. "I photographed you on the first day, before I even knew anything about you." He went very still. She met his eyes. "I think I knew then," she said softly. He came off the railing. He was in front of her, and he raised his hand and touched her jaw, just his fingertips, the lightest contact, and she leaned into it without deciding to. "Mara," he said. "Don't say something careful," she said. "I don't need careful right now." He kissed her, not like the first time, brief and tentative, like someone who knew what he wanted and had given her every chance to walk away, and was now, finally, not pretending he didn't want it. She kissed him back with all the weeks of it, the restraint and the confusion and the slow, terrifying opening of something she had been so certain she was done feeling. When they broke apart, she was breathing differently. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Same as before," he said. "One day at a time." But then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, a message from an unfamiliar number, but the wording was unmistakably Daniel's. He had spoken to someone at her agency. He had found a way to suggest to her main client that she had been unreachable and unreliable during a critical project window, a project she had prearranged coverage for, documented in writing, agreed with her client before she left. But doubt was enough. In her industry, doubt was sufficient damage. She read the message twice. She looked up. Elias saw her face. "What happened?" Her jaw was tight. "Daniel, he found a way to reach my client." She paused. "I might lose the contract." His expression shifted. Not alarm. Something colder and more deliberate. "What do you need?" he asked. That was the question. Not what did he do, not how could he. "What do you need?" She exhaled. "I need to make a call," she said, "and then I need to deal with this." "Okay." He stepped back, giving her room, not disappearing. She made the call. She reached her client directly, explained clearly, sent the documented proof within 20 minutes. Her client was reassured. The contract held. She put the phone down and sat for a moment in the quiet. Then she looked at Elias. "It's resolved," she said. He set a mug of tea in front of her. He had made it while she was on the call. She looked at the mug, at him. "He's not going to stop," she said. "No," Elias said. "Probably not. That might be complicated." "I know." He sat across from her. "Is that a reason to not do this, or a reason to do it differently?" She wrapped her hands around the mug. "Differently," she said. Surprised by how quickly the answer came, he nodded, like he had known. She looked at him across the small table, this man who had shown up in a place that was supposed to be hers alone and had fixed everything that was broken and asked for nothing, and was now asking her for this one small thing. Don't decide this is impossible before you know what it could be. She was not going to let Daniel make this decision for her. She had let him take too many things already. The next morning, she was almost certain she was ready to leave. She packed her things slowly. He finished the last of the repairs, the final items on his list, the ones he had been spacing out across the weeks without quite acknowledging why. They moved around each other in the cabin, with the ease of people who had learned the specific grammar of each other's silences. She found him in the back room, patching the last of the roof leak. "You're going to keep coming up here," she said, not a question. "That was always the plan," he said. She looked at the room, at the work he had done, the careful, steady accumulation of it. 2 weeks of someone showing up and doing what they said they would. "She chose well," Mara said softly, meaning Ruth. He looked at her over his shoulder. "So did she," he said. She understood he meant her choosing to come here. They had coffee on the porch one last time. The mountain was clear, washed clean by the weeks of rain, every color more itself. She photographed the view. She photographed the cabin. She took one more photograph of him on the porch with his coffee, looking out at the trees, completely aware she was doing it this time. She didn't pretend otherwise. "Send me that one," he said without turning. She lowered the camera. "You always know. You're not as subtle as you think." He turned and looked at her, and she saw the warmth in it, unguarded and real. I don't mind." She was smiling without meaning to. The realization arrived a moment after the fact, the way warmth from a fire takes a moment to reach you. They stood at their cars in the late morning. The mountain was quiet. The pines dripped the last of the rain. "There's a farmer's market in town," he said. "Every other Saturday? I usually go?" "That's very specific information," she said. "Yes," he said. He was looking at her with that clarity she had stopped trying to deflect. "It is." She looked at him for a moment, at the mountain behind him, at the cabin with its repaired window and its level shelves and its photographs still on the walls. "Every other Saturday," she said. "Every other Saturday," he confirmed. She got in her car. She pulled away slowly. She looked in the rearview mirror once, and he was still standing there, not watching her leave the way people watched when they were uncertain, watching the way he did everything, with patience and the simple confidence that things would be what they were going to be. She drove down the mountain. Her chest was full, not fixed, not finished, just full. And she thought, as the trees closed in around the road below her, some things you don't find by looking. Some things find you in a place you went to be alone. 3 months later, she was still certain she had made the right choice. For the first time in a very long time, that certainty felt clean. She was at the farmer's market when she found him at the honey stall, examining labels with the same methodical attention he gave everything. She walked up beside him without announcing herself and picked up a jar and read the label with equal seriousness. "Blackberry," she said. "Too sweet," he said. "Wildflower. Better." She put the blackberry jar down and picked up the wildflower. He was smiling. Not much. Just at the corners. The way that meant he was genuinely amused rather than performing it. She had learned the difference. They walked the market together after. He bought vegetables. She bought nothing useful and several things she wanted. He held her bag when her hands were full without being asked. She photographed the produce stalls and the old man with the wool caps and the quality of early autumn light through the canvas awnings. When she turned around, she found him watching her work. "You look different behind the camera," he said. "How?" "Like you're exactly where you're supposed to be." Her throat was warm. She lowered the camera. She took a step toward him, in the middle of the market, with people around them and stalls on every side and no fireplace and no storm. And she looked up at him and said, "I need to tell you something." He looked back, still and present. "I love you," she said. Simple, terrifying, true. "And I know it's early, and I know there are still things we haven't figured out, but I needed to say it out loud so it's real." He was quiet for a moment. Then he set down the bag he was carrying and took her face in both hands and looked at her with those eyes that saw too much and made her want to be seen anyway. "I've been in love with you since you told me Ruth would have liked me being here," he said. "On the second day." She laughed, startled and warm and finally not afraid of it at all. He kissed her right there in the market. Not careful, not brief, real. When they broke apart, she was still smiling. "The photograph," she said. "The first one I took of you. I printed it." "Where is it?" "On my wall." "Which wall?" "The one I see first in the morning," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. His thumb moved across her cheekbone, gentle and sure. "Okay," he said, quietly, like that one word covered everything. It did. Daniel had sent 2 more messages in the months since the cabin. She had read them both, understood them for what they were, and not replied. The contract she had nearly lost was now her largest ongoing project. She had gone back to the cabin in September, alone, for a weekend, and photographed it differently than she had before. With affection, with the knowledge of what had happened there. She had sent Elias the best image. He had texted back one word, home. She had saved it in a folder labeled, "Things I Want to Keep." They stood in the market in the clear autumn light, her hand in his, the day open and ordinary and exactly enough. She had come to the mountain to be alone, to recover and retreat and build her walls back properly. Instead, she had learned what it felt like to let someone see her without the camera between them. She had been terrified. She was still sometimes, in the small hours, uncertain and remembering. But then she looked at the photograph on her wall, or heard him on the porch at the cabin, or felt his hand covering hers on the rim of a plate in a kitchen that smelled like rain. And she understood that this was what Ruth had always known and never quite said. Some things are worth being seen for, If you made it all the way to the end, please subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. I would love to hear from you. On a scale of 0 to 10, how did this story make you feel? Drop your rating in the comments. I will read every single one. I am truly grateful you are here. See you in the next story.